Hey everyone, welcome back to the Lifestyle Lifters Show. And I am delighted to be joined by Brian hÁonghusa, an online health and fitness coach based in Dublin, Ireland, but currently residing down in Cork. Brian, welcome to the Lifestyle Lifters Show.
Adrian, thank you for having me. It is a pleasure. Looking forward to having a good nutrition-oriented conversation here.
Absolutely, man. Absolutely. And before we dive into that, Brian, my first question to all our guests is share something about yourself, Brian, that most people listening do not know.
Ooh, that most people listen don't know. Hmm. What could I use for that? Hmm. Yeah, I'm struggling now that I'm on the spot. Like
Not to
what?
put you on the spot at all, Brian.
I'm trying to think of what would genuinely not a lot of people know. Um, can you come back to me on that later in the show and
That can be your final question. So
let me
we'll
yeah
give you a bit of time.
let me mull that over in the background while we have it.
Awesome. Yeah, perfect, perfect. So Brian, you're a certified nutritionist and you've been qualified since 2015 as we spoke about before we started airing this. So tell me, Brian, like what actually got you interested in the first part in becoming a certified nutritionist?
Yeah, pretty basic story with that. So I was quite skinny as a young fella, in secondary school. I was playing sports, um, and I wanted to bulk up as we often do want to, as young men. So I started going to the gym when I was, as soon as I was allowed to go to the gym, like in terms of age. So when I was 16, I started lifting. And then I got very interested in how the nutrition side of that will influence, your results and your progress. I found that to be very, very interesting.
Yeah.
So when the time came to decide on, if I want to, go to university, the nutrition in UCD was kind of my top choice because I was like, okay, that sounds like be really good. And just, yeah, that's how the interest was formed. And then I just carried on with it like since then.
Awesome. Yeah, it just sparked an interest from a young age. And I guess then, Brian, ever since you got into becoming a certified nutritionist, I'm sure we don't just come to a point where we're know it all straight away. It's like a learning curve. You learn through obviously the education, the books, but you also learn from experience. What were, we'll say, like some of the, just reflecting back now, what are some of the mistakes that you might have made and lessons you learned in the past just from your own mistakes regarding nutrition?
Yeah, like where to begin. Um, and you're dead right. Like in terms of it being a learning curve, like it literally never stops,
Yeah.
because like on almost a weekly basis, I'll learn something new or correct maybe a belief that I would have held in the past, which is probably, where most of the mistakes were made is having, picking up ideas or beliefs from wherever it was at the time, that just weren't accurate. So
Yeah.
you at that stage before you really know anything about anything, or before you can appreciate how much you don't know and how much everyone else doesn't know as well. So therefore you can't just trust all these self-proclaimed gurus out there. But there was all sorts. There was like kind of a fundamental lack of understanding of the principles of nutrition, right? So like early days I would have kind of just attached myself to, okay, diet quality is important, eating lots of protein is important, because I was generally trying to just gain weight all the time, gain muscle mass all the time. Like that was my main thing. I was never overweight or anything, thankfully. So it was always just about like skinny lad trying to get bigger, right? That was the gig. Um, so plenty of mistakes around that, just saying, okay, I'm just going to eat a shitload and that's cool, right? And not really appreciating the role that even calories play, or the role that, well, I would have appreciated like the protein aspect, but yeah, I mean, I can remember, you know, thinking certain foods are good for muscle gain versus other foods, right? And all the bodybuilders were eating oats and things like that, and eating like tuna and stuff, and it's like, you know they have their value because of the nutritional components of them, not because they're, bodybuilding foods.
Sure. Yeah.
And yeah, just no appreciation of like calories. I got into the paleo diet for a while. When
How
I was
was your experience with paleo, man? I did like give it a go myself too. I'm just curious your thoughts.
Yeah, most people seem to have given it a shot. Like all of us, just pretty much nearly gave it a go at some point. But I mean, I still have a bit of a soft spot for it. Like it's definitely not a bad diet as far as
Yeah.
they go. It's just it's not that the diet, there's anything wrong with the diet necessarily, depending on how it's put together. Like some of maybe the kind of low carb emphasis is maybe a bit wishy-washy and unnecessary, but it's more like the explanation of why you do certain things within the diet. It's like, oh, you can't eat gluten or like legumes because they'll damage your intestinal lining. Or it's like, okay, well, that's an issue. Like that's not good nutrition information, right? You don't want to be telling people that. But yeah, I did the paleo diet for like a couple of years. I had no problem with it. Like, I was very, very invested. I was like, okay, eat these foods, enjoy the diet. But like, it did mean that, I didn't eat like bread and stuff for a long, long time. And if I was going out for pizza or something, I'd be getting gluten-free pizza and all this kind of unnecessary stuff. Like definitely my saturated fat intake was definitely too high during that period, with all the butter that I was consuming and putting in coffee at the time. So drinking those bulletproof coffees.
Bulletproof. Yes, man.
Yeah, so like a lot of stupid shit, like in retrospect, but that's how you learn. And as long as you don't stay stuck in those beliefs, it's going to be okay. But like I mean I have a lot of empathy for anyone who doesn't have like a keen interest in nutrition or any education in nutrition, because if people like ourselves can get caught up with misinformation, then it's like, what chance do lay people have? All right, so I have a huge amount of empathy for people trying to make sense of this stuff. And I wouldn't begrudge people for thinking a certain way, but it's when obviously the kind of charlatans on social media start cramming misinformation down everyone's throats that it becomes an issue.
Yes, that absolute kind of thinking. That this is like it's this way and this way only. And I fell into that trap before as well, Brian. I remember when I was in college, I'd come home on a Friday evening. We went to college in Limerick, and my mum, fair play to her, she would have a lovely Irish dinner there on the table. A steak, mushrooms, everything fried up, nice veggies there too, and of course the staple of most Irish dinners, white potatoes. Now, my belief at the time was that white potatoes are quote unquote bad for you. They'd make you fat. So therefore, I would have tossed them aside and I would not have eaten them. And like I would have been afraid to do that for probably a couple of years. And white rice was another food as well. So as you said, it's like just belief shifting too and questioning those beliefs you have around food and seeing how actually true or false they are.
Yeah. I know it's such a shame, like especially with the potatoes, because like they're such a good food choice.
Unreal. Yeah.
For many reasons, from like the nutrition profile in them versus other carbohydrates and the satiety that they bring as well. Like they're so good. So anyone who like has body composition goals and trying to lose weight or fat is like, you should be eating more potatoes as your carb of choice.
Absolutely. Yeah. As you said, the satiety there, just how they keep you fuller for longer is fantastic. And Brian, we'll segue now slightly into, so someone here listening now, they want to improve the overall quality of their diet. And with the goal being of just to improve their body composition. I mean, where do we even start, Brian?
Yeah, I mean, if you're trying to improve your body composition, well, with anything, you have to first assess where you're currently at, right? So if you look at what a typical poor diet might look like for someone who is struggling with their body composition, or their body composition is going the wrong way, what does that look like? That usually looks like, low intakes of plant foods, definitely, low intakes of protein across the day, high intakes of, hyper palatable, very calorie dense foods. So looking at that, then that will give you an idea of where to start if someone is trying to make improvements to their diet. So you start trying to incorporate more fruits and vegetables and pulses and things like that, because the vast majority of people are not eating enough of those. So that's a worthwhile endeavor to try and get yourself to a place where you can eat multiple servings of those on a daily basis, ensuring that you have a high protein intake overall, and that goes for each main meal of the day, plus or minus whatever snacks you might have. Making sure you're eating enough, because most people don't eat enough protein, breakfast and lunch. They may get enough at dinner, but it's not guaranteed depending on what they eat. So those are things to start with. And then, I mentioned kind of excessive intake of hyperpalatable food and really calorie dense stuff. That's, we say calorie dense, it just means the weight of the food contains a lot of calories compared to another food, right? So that makes those foods easy to overeat because they don't take up a lot of space in the stomach. But by virtue of eating more protein and more plants, you tend to squeeze out some of the excesses that you might be having for other food groups, right? So in my approach to nutrition and coaching people, it's often a case of, okay, what can we add in to make this person's diet better, rather than what do we take away? Because, as I said, they're adding in more protein, adding in more fruits and vegetables will almost spontaneously just
remove the other stuff.
Yeah, or at least, bring it down to a more reasonable quantity. And then, then you can start to refine that a little bit more. It's like, okay, well, how much of those types of foods is acceptable on a day-to-day basis? You obviously have to, monitor your progress and things like that. It's important, I think, to have awareness of your eating behaviors and, when do you eat? Why do you eat at those times? Often it's just a daily structure that's handed to you, based on your job or your studies or whatever it is. So thinking to yourself, okay, how hungry am I now for this meal? And as you're going through the meal, saying, okay, how hungry am I, or how full am I feeling as I'm eating this? And then give some credence to, okay, if I have fat loss goals or body composition goals, maybe I stop at around like 70%, 80% full, rather than just eating all of the portion that's in front of me, because
that's on the plate. Yeah.
This is what I always say to people. Is like, what are the odds that the full plate of food is always the right amount? Because that's how people often treat it. Because like, okay, I clean my plate and that's my meal done, right? So you're telling me that's the perfect amount for you every single time, like every meal you've had for the last 5 years or whatever it is,
Yeah.
And people who tend to have an easier time managing their weight would have an easier time, leaving food when they're full, considering like, oh, I'm actually hungry for this. Do I actually want this? I've been able to say no, or I've had enough. Like that's definitely an important attitude to build, I think, for long-term success in this stuff.
Yeah. And just because you're kind of talking about there, obviously portion sizes and control and having some metrics there too, how important do you feel is it, Brian, for somebody to actually go through a period of time where they're using like MyFitnessPal or one of these apps and actually tracking their calories?
I think it's highly informative and educational. It's probably not something that most people are going to do for the rest of their lives. Some people are perfectly happy to do it and track just all the time, and that's grand. But in terms of phases of coaching, we often do build in a phase of like, okay, let's work on moving away from tracking if you have been tracking. Because I think it can teach you a huge amount about your diet, like, and doing it properly as well, because, and that's where it's useful to have a professional, because like, someone could be, working away on MyFitnessPal on their own, and, they could track a scone or something. Like they could look up a scone, right? And it's like, okay, there's scones there that say they're 100 calories, and there's scones down there that are like 600 calories. So pick the 100-calorie one.
Yeah.
Because obviously, you have to have some way of making the decision. And unless you have maybe professional guidance or some sort of awareness of this stuff, you're probably not going to be sure which one is which, in terms of what's the most appropriate one for you. So having someone look over your food diaries and be like, okay, I see you had a scone there, you logged that as 100 calories. the harsh reality is probably not 100 calories, like if you had a whole scone, and that goes for a lot of different foods. So it'll teach you a lot about the foods, and then having some sort of input there I think is valuable, because you know, I look at food diaries on a daily basis for people, and it's like, okay, I can see where they're maybe making mistakes and they're reporting. You can have a chat about that. The person learns from that mistake. So it's really, really valuable. But I think you have to take an active approach to tracking, because you do see it a lot where people are very passive about it, and they're just like, oh, okay, I'll scan that, and okay, that's the numbers there, but they never really like look at it to see, oh, like, okay, so my normal bowl of oats in the morning is 200 calories from the oats, and then, you know, 100 calories from the whey protein, etc., etc. So you want to actually, you know, engage with the process and say, what can this teach me? Because that's going to be really important for actually moving away then from tracking, because then you learn to, you know, kind of eyeball foods, and you sort of have a reference point for this sort of stuff. But a lot of people don't do that with tracking. They just plug in the numbers and actually don't pay attention to what's going on. So that's why it's good to, you know, after you've been doing it for a little while, start to try and test yourself and be like, okay, I'm going to try weigh out, you know, 40 grams of oats here, and let's see how close I get. You know, cover up the number on the scales, and see then when you've put your oats out, it's like, oh, okay, you know, it was 35 grams. That's pretty good. And there's going to be standard measures and stuff. You know, I use a protein scoop for my oats, so I know
100%, man. Yeah, 35 grams.
Yeah, but no, it's like, all right, I'm gonna have 2 scoops in every bowl of oats, and then if I want to
Yeah.
modify that, I can. But that's, yeah, it's really useful to track and to get an appreciation of the macro content and calorie content of foods. But then, yeah, you have to be kind of, you know, you have to have your eyes open, so to speak, while you're doing it, because you probably noticed this yourself, but there's loads of error, well, in MyFitnessPal in general, but especially for things like fiber quantities of food. So people are, you know, the database is user managed, right? So people can be lazy, right? They put in the calories and then the fats, carbs, and protein, but maybe not the fiber. So you'll see a lot of foods have like 0 grams of fiber listed when they're actually a high fiber food, you know, or you'll just see some mad shit the odd time where it's like, okay, yeah, this food was listed as being, you know, 50 grams of protein in a serving, and it's like potatoes or something. It's like, that's clearly a mistake. But, you know, I can tell that people aren't looking at that as they log it, because otherwise they'd probably stop and say, hey, that doesn't look right. So ask yourself as you're going through, does this look right? And then, you know, learn what you need to learn about tracking, so then you can eventually move away from it using those skills that you developed, you know?
Yeah, it's kind of like the 1 teaspoon of peanut butter, the 1 teaspoon of butter, when in reality, if you were to actually assess and look at how much they took, it's probably at least double what they've written down on the MyFitnessPal. Just curious in your thoughts as well, Brian. I recently heard in a podcast with Jordan Syatt and Mike Vacanti, and they were speaking about just tracking food, as you said. And it's just interesting you spoke about the importance of actually being active in the process of tracking. That you're not just, you know, pressing the tick for the first scone you see on the list there. They mentioned, and they brought up an important point, that those who tracked immediately after the ate versus those who waited until end of day and then tracked it all at once. Well, whose reports do you think were more accurate? Immediately after versus end of day?
Definitely immediately after, like, there's no question.
Yeah, they were saying like the calories were like so obsessively skewed in the wrong direction, those who did it end of day, by upwards of as much as 50%. So they could have been reporting like 1200 when in reality it was 1200 plus another 6 on top. You know, so there, it just, as you said, taking that active approach to tracking is really important.
Yeah, it's something that anyone who's tracking, like as a client, I'd suggest, you know, log it right after you have it or while you're having it. Like, it doesn't take a lot of time to do. You know, I've had people sometimes, you know, complain, like, oh, you know, the effort of having to log it like at every meal. It's like, it's not that much effort really, you know.
Yeah.
What are you doing? You're probably on your phone when you're eating anyway. So
it's literally an extra 5 minutes of your day, and it can make, as you said, a huge difference. So Brian, if we assess the calories, then obviously, like as you mentioned, the macros and the makeup of those calories is important. For a lot of people listening, you look at their protein intake and it's deficient at breakfast. It's like, even if you have oats, fantastic source of carbohydrate, but as you know yourself, it's not like a source of protein. For lunch, it could be something like soup, which
Mm.
again, depending on the type, can be quite beneficial if there's veggies there. But again, there's no protein. And then, you might have like they get to a point where at dinner they've had no lean source of protein, and then that could be, the chicken breast or the mince or whatever form of meat you're having there. And their total for the day could be as little as 50, 60 grams. How does somebody in that position, what are some ways that they can actually bump up the amount of protein they get on a daily basis?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's probably where I'd have to start with the vast majority of people that I'm working with. So another part of my nutrition philosophy, like including it being an additive kind of approach rather than a subtractive, is that I want to tweak what the person's currently doing rather than trying to like throw out their existing dietary pattern in place of something new. That can be quite hard to implement, even harder to sustain for somebody. It's also not necessary. So if we take that example that you gave me, it's like, okay, that's Adrian's diet now. All right, how do we actually improve that, like in the context of more protein, right? So take the breakfast first of all. I think, the kind of the dairy-based high protein snacks and drinks and puddings and mousses and all that kind of stuff that we have in the food supply at the moment. I think they make life much, much easier for this kind of thing, because, if you have one of those protein yogurts in the fridge or or one of the pouches of the pots or whatever it is, like you can just add that to basically any meal and it's just an extra, 20, 25 grams of protein, right? Super easy, tastes nice as well. Low in calories, low in fat, just, high in protein and a bit of carbohydrates from the dairy. So for porridge-based breakfast, I would say, okay, just add in however many of those kind of thing, like protein yogurts or skyr yogurt or fat-free Greek yogurt, add enough of that in based on your needs that it gives you, enough protein at that meal. If you're trying to hit, say, 150 grams of protein per day and you have 3 meals, then it's like, okay, I know I have to get 50 grams per meal approximately, right? It doesn't have to be perfectly even split, but it's a good idea to have it reasonably distributed across the day. So you can have that. You can use a protein shake. You can, drink that on the side, or any of those kind of protein drinks that you can get, or you can stir some whey protein into the oats, or just add a couple of eggs, on the side with the porridge. Lots of ways to do that. And you can see how that there's very little that the person actually has to change there except to add that stuff in, right? Then for something like soup, again, it's pretty, like, again, you could have soup and say, all right, I'm gonna have like a protein yogurt for, like quote unquote dessert after lunch, right? That will do part of the job. But for things like soup, I like for people to first of all bulk them out with things like chickpeas, lentils, beans, right? So
Yeah.
if you're making soup, you can get a can of those and then just throw them into it, and then when you heat up the soup, they'll get heated up as well. That adds a lot of fiber, that adds a lot of micronutrients, some carbohydrates, some protein. Not a great way to get protein in, but especially if you're on a plant-based diet, they will make up a decent serving of your protein per day. But then you can get things like, pre-cooked chicken, pre-cooked ham, beef.
Absolutely, man.
Just throw those in. You can get pre-cooked, prawns that are ready to eat. Just throw those in. Like they are. Like I'm talking about very convenient ways here, intentionally, right, to make this, easier for people to implement. I was talking to a lady yesterday on a consult client of mine who was making soup, right? So same example. And I think corn is very, very useful in this context as well. So, the meat-free protein.
The meat-free, yeah.
Yeah, it's a mycoprotein, so it's made from the mushroom family, basically. But what I like about that is it cooks very quickly from frozen, and there's no like hygiene issues like you would have with raw meat or fish or poultry, right? So you can cook that really, really quickly. For example, the corn mince or the corn pieces, you know, it looks like chicken pieces, but it's not, obviously. But you can just microwave that, or, you know, if you're heating up soup in a pot or something, you can just throw that in and it'll be ready in like 10 minutes or less. Or just cook the corn separately and then just add it to your soup as needed, right? That corn is very high in protein, very high in fiber as well, so another bonus there. And if you get the one that's kind of like minimally processed, like I said, the pieces or the mince, you're not going to get like any carbohydrates or fats, really, right? So just in terms of the time that takes to prepare and the quality of the food, I think that's a really, really useful way to do that. And that's something I do a lot myself as well.
Yeah. As you said, it just comes down to convenience. Like, it takes no extra effort to have one of those protein yogurts or some 0% Faye or Skyr yogurt at breakfast. Get some sliced chicken. If you cannot cook it yourself the day before, add that to your soup. And then for dinner, you have more control over that as well, which I love. Brian, I'm just curious on your thoughts. So I feel, to be fair, in the industry, there is a big movement away from like the IIFYM, if it fits your macros, where for years you were blasted with these YouTubers who were absolutely shredded to the bone, and they're just they make it look like they're just having cereal for breakfast. They're having these toasties, these bagel, these cinnamon buns, and, you know, this is how I look like this. When in reality, we know the importance of, obviously, their calories, their protein. They probably have it all done out to an absolute T, and they're just showing the highlights. But just in your end, Brian, I'm curious, has there actually been studies or any research done where we'll say one group were like what we'll call an 80-20 or 90-10 approach, where 80 or 90% of their foods are what we call more single ingredient, minimally processed foods, and the other 10 to 20% are more refined, versus a group who were more like IIFYM, that look, if it fits your calories, if it fits your macros, you can have anything you want. Do you know, is there any such study done where we'll say over an 8, 12, 16-week period, you were to measure two groups with, we'll say, the same calorie target, but obviously the makeup of those calories are different, and how they would have looked before and after in terms of body composition?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't know if there's well, to my knowledge, there's no direct studies
It's a
comparing.
hard one to study. Yeah, it would be.
But you do get a lot of information from like that you can glean from studies done on, you know, say body composition or fat loss, where there's different, you know, macronutrient splits, but calories are the same, right? So the isocaloric studies, you know, that's quite well established in, say, like, you know, low carb versus high carb approaches to nutrition, right? Where a lot of people would say that, oh, low carb is superior for fat loss. I mean, it's not really, because when you take those two groups, same calories, match protein as well, which is important, because like that's often a confounding factor in research looking at body composition, is that, okay, if someone goes on a low carb diet, they probably also start eating more protein. So you have to make sure those are equated. I mean, but you can look at like research that, like, more refined diets versus minimally refined diets, right? So you can look at even things like, you know, the calorie extraction from more refined foods is higher than from whole foods, right? So the more processed or hyper processed or refined a food is, you may extract more energy from that. So that means that, like, even if you're eating the same amount of, you know, calories, in theory, you're extracting more if your diet is more processed, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
You know, give an example, like eating whole almonds versus almond butter. You know, you extract more calories from the almond butter than you do from the whole almonds, right? It's not a lot, like, obviously, but if you were to, like, you know, extend that over an entire lifestyle and dietary approach, and you make that the case for all foods, like, it's not a great example in the case that, like, they're both kind of minimally processed anyway, you know. So like a better comparison would be like, you know, almonds versus, you know, Nutella or something, maybe, because it's more, you know,
Sure.
sugar
Yeah.
and oils in that. But I'd like to actually answer your question. If the calories are matched and protein is matched, you should
Yeah,
see
calories and protein match would say, yeah.
you'll see pretty much the same results from both diets. And there's people who've done kind of experiments to prove this point. So I don't know if you ever saw the guy who just ate ice cream and whey protein for 100 days. Don't know if you ever saw him.
No,
Yeah,
never saw it.
this is going back a few years now, to be fair. But yeah, just to prove this kind of if it fits your macros point, all he ate was ice cream basically, and then just used whey protein to hit his protein targets to make sure he wasn't just low in protein. Um, and then yeah, did that. I think it was for 100 days, and his body composition improved because he was in a calorie deficit. Now he wasn't feeling very well by the end of
it. That's a caveat, yeah, for sure.
yeah, the other part of the conversation, right? It's like,
Yeah,
are you
yeah.
going to be healthy doing that? And no, you're not. Now, did he get healthier as a result of losing the body fat that he had to lose? He did, right? So certain blood work improved, but he started to feel pretty shit by the end of that. And like that's an N=1 experiment, obviously, but it does illustrate a point
Yeah.
that yes, where body composition is concerned, if you get your calories in order and you get your protein in order, then yes, like on paper, if it fits your macros works. But the argument then is like, yes, but how do you actually set up? It's not just about having a calorie deficit. It's about how do you set up your diet and lifestyle so that you can adhere to a calorie deficit for as long as you need to get the results from it,
Yeah.
right? If your diet is really low satiety, really low in nutrients, you're going to feel pretty shit, and you're going
How
to,
are you feeling exactly? How is your energy levels?
yeah. So it's
Yeah,
not going to, like, you can't, I don't think it's fair to compare the two in that
sure.
context. Now, the if it fits your macros movement, like not in the way that you described it, and that's how it often is, like where people are just like, oh yeah, just they just show you the 20%.
The 20%, exactly, man.
I don't think anyone does that well eating just kind of a fairly poor diet and just making sure they eat enough protein, and that's definitely not good for long-term health. Right. So whatever
Yeah.
about body composition, it's definitely not good for your long-term health, because you're going to be missing micronutrients. You're going to be missing plant phytochemicals and things like that you are harder to quantify. They're not just a macronutrient, and they're not even a traditional micronutrient, but they basically are. So I think it was helpful in terms of liberating people from like this discussion of like, oh, is it okay for me to eat peanut butter? Is it okay for me to eat cheese? Is it okay for me to eat beef? And it's like, you can stop asking these kind of questions about individual foods, because it's your overall dietary pattern that matters, and then how that relates to your overall calorie and macronutrient intake, and then also
Yes.
micronutrient intake.
I love that approach, man.
Yeah, so I think that whole if it's your macros, it help free people from like the idea of there being good or bad foods, which is definitely valuable. But it goes too far if people get the impression that, as you said, you can just have, cereal and whey protein and just basically eat shite all day. And as long as you're within your targets, like, yeah, like I said, on paper it works, but you're going to feel like dog shit
Is that
doing.
what you want to do? Like, do you want to, as you said, do you want to feel like dog shit for the rest of the day as a result of doing that? Probably not.
And the
So,
rest of your life, essentially, if that's how you're building
yeah,
your habits.
exactly, man. Yeah, no, I actually, that's a good frame of mind to, as you said, that it gives people freedom and it's liberating to know that can I have insert food? Absolutely. Given that, you stay within the parameters of the calories, the protein, maybe the 80-20, 90-10 approach. But on the flip side, not to take it to the extremes. It's always somewhere in the middle, Brian.
Yeah.
Brian, because obviously of time of year as well, and I know this is something that you coach a lot of your clients on as well. Like, just obviously we kind of touched on developing a good relationship with food, and on the back of that, then often comes binge eating.
Hmm.
What would you say are some of the, first of all, if you were to assess, like, what are the most common triggers?
The most common triggers, there's three typically, right? So the first one is just not eating regularly enough. So basically, you're binging because you're overly hungry, right? So that can be the type of person who tries to eat very little all day, or it could be even the type of person that hypothetical diet for yourself earlier, where they're eating very little in that first 2/3 of the day, and then they might have a dinner, but like because they've had so little earlier in the day, then that's where they eat an entire pack of biscuits with their cup of tea in the evening, right? Because the energy intake of the day is very skewed. So making sure your kind of energy intake is reasonably spread throughout the day, and you're not ending up super hungry in the evening. Like that's one of the reasons I don't want to get into it like right now, because you asked me. I said there's three things, and I haven't got onto the second two yet. So
hunger,
hunger, overly restrictive diets basically, and what that looks like is having diet rules there. You can't eat XYZ foods for whatever reason. We've talked a bit around that earlier on already, but you can't eat certain foods, and if you do, you have then fucked up, and that will trigger the binge, because the mentality here is, okay, I'm never supposed to eat that food, right? For whatever reasons that I've come up with or I've been led to believe, right? I'm never supposed to eat that food. I have eaten it now, so I better make the most of it, because
therefore I better keep going.
because as soon as this sort of binge is resolved, I'm going back to never eating that food again. Like if I said to you, hey, Adrian, right, this is like you're eating a cheeseburger right now, but this is the last time you're ever going to eat a cheeseburger, and it's like as soon as you leave this restaurant and stop ordering cheeseburgers, more cheeseburgers, right? You're probably going to sit there and be like, well, fuck it, I'm gonna
can I get 5 more, please?
So that's the second reason, kind of diet rules and restrictions. And then the third will be, and this is a broad category, but emotionally driven binge eating, right? And that can result from a lot of things, right? It can be like, stress triggers or relationship triggers, trauma triggers. It's basically just where food becomes a coping mechanism. The binge eating is characterized as kind of this, you're almost like out of body experience while you're doing it. So it kind of numbs everything out. So it can assist people, I say assist in quotation marks, but it can assist people by allowing them to tune, like just to numb or block out all the negative feelings they might be experiencing, right? Because while they're binging, they're not feeling lonely, or they're not feeling upset, or they're not feeling, worried about whatever it is that's bothering them. So it has that effect. And then it can also have the effect of, like, obviously if you're eating hyper palatable food, there is a sort of
short-term gratification.
And it could help you feel better, as well as potentially blocking out some of the negative stuff. So those are three main ways that you see binge eating occur.
It's kind of like a coping mechanism, as you said, Brian. Some people might resort to alcohol, where they just have a couple of drinks to unwind, to get their head off something, and then obviously wake up the next day, and there's some stage you got to deal with it. But just now at the moment, I just don't want to think about it. Same with people with food, as you said. Could be stress at work, stress in their relationships, their overall lifestyle, or things just not going their way. Brian, just going off the back of that then. So, seeing as we spoke about binge eating, one of our clients here, she would have celebrated Thanksgiving, and she was on a weight loss journey, and this was like a big aha moment for her, that she was able to like enjoy the Thanksgiving meal, the dinner, quote unquote, guilt free, and just save some calories maybe during the week, so she could have a bit more that Thursday. But I know just a lot of people listening, Brian, if they're on a health and fitness journey, there's either a belief that if they, they've anxiety, I guess, just eating out at restaurants or socializing with their friends, and they're just worried that they're going to lose all their progress with, say, one meal or one night out. But just in general, Brian, for anyone here listening, coming up to the Christmas period also, like, what are some just general piece of advice you'd give to someone who does have that element of social anxiety, whether it is with alcohol or food or both, on a night out or a meal out with family and friends?
So if we're looking at this, like, usually it'll come back to, it's like, why is there an issue with this? Well, it's like, okay, I'm gonna potentially consume more calories than I have allotted, right, in this day or week or whatever it may be. And that is going to be counterproductive to my fat loss goals, right? So there's a multitude of ways we can look at this. But if someone's going out for a meal, so one of the ways you can manage this is try and, do some calorie, budgeting or banking, right? So if you know that you have a certain average calorie target to hit on a week-to-week basis, then you know that if you, delegate, 100 or 200 calories for a few days of that week to the day that you have, say, Thanksgiving, then that gives you a bigger budget, so to speak, for that day. Now, there's, this can be a double-edged sword, because if you push it too far, then you can end up just too hungry day to day, right? So there are limitations to sort of all this stuff, but you can push it too far and then you may end up overeating anyway, which is obviously counterproductive. And like, if you push that too far, let's say someone's calorie target is 2,000 calories and they eat 4,000 calories on one day, you can't just try and compensate by having 0 the next day to make that out, right? Because that's disordered, and that's, not a good path to go down. But you can do that to an extent, okay? Then what I also encourage people to do is, like, at food situations, I would basically, a lot of this comes back to just being more mindful with what you're doing with your eating. So the more mindful you are, the more belly full you're going to be as well, chances are, going through the meal. So kind of touched on this earlier, but pay attention to how you're feeling as you're going through that meal. Eat the meal slowly, because if you eat it too fast, you don't have time to acknowledge how full you are. And, you can already be stuck into dessert or whatever before the dinner has even settled, so to speak. And then you end up overly full, like, 15, 20 minutes later. It's like, where did that come from? It's like, well, now that the dinner had time to actually send the satiety signals to your brain, now you realize you actually had enough. So take your time with the meals. I talk about this 5, 10, 15 approach to meals. So 5 deep breaths before the meal, right? That helps put your body into a more relaxed state. It also kind of primes people to actually get ready to pay attention to the eating itself. So 5 deep breaths, 10 seconds between, like, mouthfuls. So, put your fork down, put your knife down, put the food down. If it's like a sandwich or something, chew it properly. That will force you to slow down, obviously, as well. And just and it'll give you a chance to pay attention to what the food actually tastes like, what the textures of the food are like. If you're eating with company, it'll give you a chance to, actually engage in conversation, etc. And then the 15 is, 15 minutes at least to eat the meal, right? Because, when I get people to start tracking this stuff initially, it's like, yeah, I eat a meal in 6 minutes. And it's like, that's quite a short space of time to put away a full meal, right? And then, if you eat that in 6 minutes, and it's like, okay, well, what's next? Because you're still hungry.
You're still hungry. It hasn't digested.
Yeah, so that's huge, man. And people get a lot out of that, because it totally removes them from the whole tracking side of things as well, which is another cause of anxiety. It's like, oh, I'm going to my family's for Thanksgiving and I don't know how to track that unless I weigh everything out. It's like, it doesn't really matter. If you can combine that 5, 10, 15 approach with, like, some reasonable food selection when you're eating meals out. So, when I'm talking to people about this, it's like you said already, it's like somewhere in the middle. So it's like, you're looking at the menu, you identify what's probably, like, kind of the worst options on the menu based on, it could be low protein and very high in fat and very high in carbohydrates, right? That would be a pretty poor choice of, like, a main, right?
Pizza.
Yeah, I mean,
Full on.
pizza is dense, but you do at least get some protein with it anyway, like cheese and the gluten and stuff. And then obviously, like, the other end of that spectrum is like, well, you could ask for, like, plain grilled chicken and, like, plain vegetables. Now, I'm not going to recommend anyone do that unless they're on prep or something, right? And they have, like, extreme physique goals they need to stay on track with. So it's going to be somewhere in the middle. It's like, can I choose something that's, reasonably good out of the things I would like to eat here? Because that's important. Try and make the meal reasonably high in protein. Try and make the other meals that you had that day quite high in protein and plant.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And then if you can do that, you know, make a reasonable food selection and pay attention to how full you're feeling as you're going through the meal, it's kind of hard to go wrong, to be honest.
Yeah.
Now,
I
obviously,
like that approach. 5, 10, 15. And even like order an extra side of veggies or something if you wanted,
yeah,
you know,
so
bulk up, add more instead of takeaways, you said.
yeah. And then what you'll probably find there is like, okay, you know, I've had a starter and a main now, and I'm not really that much in the mood for dessert. Or, you know, you might know for yourself that you have a sweet tooth, so you'll prefer to have a dessert over a starter. So you skip the starter, have your main, and, you know, either have a whole dessert or maybe share a dessert, you know, because like it doesn't take a lot of dessert to enjoy the taste and flavors of it, if you
Yeah.
get me.
Yeah.
Like for me, I'm a dessert fiend, right? So I'll always take a dessert over a starter, right? So I go into meals out knowing that, you know, if they have something that looks proper good on the dessert menu, I'm probably gonna like get it. But you don't have to eat it all just because you're eating a meal out and because you paid for it and all that sort of stuff people tell themselves. You know, you can honor your and respect how full you are and the satisfaction of the meal. And sometimes you will just eat more because it tastes nice, right? But with nutrition and body composition, it's what you do most of the time that actually matters, right? Not what you do on this, you know, one day a week that's once a year, right? So that's another point I would make for something like Thanksgiving week. It's like, do you really need to be in a deficit that week? Like, of all the other weeks, you could be in a deficit, you know?
You chose this week. Yeah.
Do you
That's a
want to
great point.
just maybe do you just bring your calories up to maintenance?
Yeah.
And you know, so you know, probably stick on the same calories for most of the week, but then uh you know, whatever you end up consuming as extra on Thanksgiving probably bring you up to maintenance, right? Because you know, it'll
Yeah.
be another 1,000, 1,500 calories depending on the size of the person. And then just take it from there, like no stress about it. Now, again, like I said earlier, there's limitations to all this stuff where you could feasibly come up with a reason to not adhere every week. It's like, oh, I went to the cinema, or oh, I went for a meal with a friend or something. So you have to obviously be honest with yourself as well and say, okay, look, I'll pick my battles here. You know, Thanksgiving dinner with family or friends is obviously kind of a high yield event, whereas going to the cinema, something you do, you know, maybe pretty often. Maybe you're happy enough to just, you know, bring a protein bar and some water or something instead of, you
Exactly. Yeah.
know,
It's the
have
frequency of it too. Yeah. But even I was speaking to Daniel Davy, who was on previously, and as he
yeah,
was saying, if you have 4 meals a day spread across 7 days a week, that's 28 meals a week. And let's be honest, if we're applying these principles that you mentioned, like the calories are pretty intact, the macro, the micronutrients, your protein, the 80-20, 90-10 approach, if you're doing all of those things consistently, like even that one meal there where if you go a bit overboard with the limits and things aren't always in alignment with those principles, in the grand scheme of things, 1 out of 28, like that's still pretty consistent. But it's just like, as you said, it's funny this time of year, Brian, people spend more time worrying about how much weight they'll put on between Thanksgiving and New Year's Day and then forget about the other 47 weeks of the year. It's like, again, it just comes down to consistency, which is probably the number one driving factor of all of this. Brian, I'd love to talk to you about a number of other topics, but I am conscious of time here as well. So we will just wrap things up with just our final five, and these are going to be rapid fire, Brian. All right, so just
okay,
as
like
one word or one sentence where possible.
nice.
First of all, reflecting back in 2022, one new habit you've implemented yourself, Brian.
A new habit. Started using Google Calendar to plan my days, and it's been great in terms of like productivity and managing stuff.
I love it, man. Awesome. Similar to myself. I like that. What when you hear the word successful, who's the first person that comes to mind?
Jeez. David Attenborough.
Interesting. Interesting. If you could go back in time, Brian, what's one piece of advice you'd give to your younger self?
One piece of advice. Read more nonfiction. If it depends how young I'm going here, but yeah.
Read more nonfiction. Gotcha. Okay. What do you feel, Brian, is the most underrated gym exercise that most people don't do enough of?
Don't do enough of probably split squats. Is that a fair answer?
I think it's the most common one.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, no one looks forward to those. Finally, Brian, what's something that you're currently excited about yourself?
I am very likely going back to education next year. So I'm like 90% settled on this, that I'm going to do a degree of some sort in counseling and psychotherapy to complement my nutrition coaching.
Unreal.
So I'm very excited about the prospect of that, and being better able to serve people and help more people as a result of having those skills.
Awesome. That
Yeah.
sounds awesome, Brian. Unreal. Unreal. Brian, before we wrap it up with our actual final two questions, what share something first of all, Brian, about yourself that most people don't know. Bring us back to the start.
Yeah, I would say that this is kind of a weak answer because I couldn't think of anything good. But I'm a big nerd, if that's any good to people. Like I enjoy a lot of geeky stuff. Like I'm trying to think of examples, but yeah, I like all those comic book movies, and uh Buffy the Vampire Slayer is definitely a guilty
Oh,
pleasure.
deadly. Yeah, yeah.
I don't even know if it's a guilty pleasure. I think a lot of people actually enjoy that. So
Throws
yeah,
you back to the childhood days. Yeah.
yeah.
Gotcha. Awesome. Awesome. Finally, Brian, because this is the Lifestyle Lifters show, what is your definition of living a successful lifestyle?
Living a successful lifestyle, I think, is having a good grasp on, what your values are, and then taking action like on a daily basis that is in support of those. I think that's one of the best ways to live a successful and kind of fulfilled life.
I love it. I
Yeah.
love it. Brian, this has been amazing, man. First of all, I want to thank you so much for coming on, for sharing your knowledge, your expertise. No doubt a ton of value for all of our listeners here. Where can people learn more, Brian, about you and what you offer?
Yeah, thanks so much, Adrian. That was a fun chat. So I appreciate you having me on. If people want to find out more about me, Instagram is definitely the best place. It's the only social platform I'm really active on. So that's at Brian hÁonghusa, or you can find me through, the Triage Method page. Because that's the company I work for. So Triage Method, or at Brian hÁonghusa, you can find out more about me. And also
I'll
yeah, you'll link that stuff.
I'll post the links exactly. I'll post your IG in the show notes for anyone who, obviously, if you're not doing it already, definitely shoot Brian a follow there. And as you said, just send him a message on Instagram or take it from there.
Yeah, sound man.
Brian, this has been awesome. I feel we could definitely talk about much more, or talk in much more detail. Just for coming up to time there. So thank you for your time. I appreciate it, and we might do a round two next year.
Yeah, sure thing. It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Okay, awesome.